Welcome back to our news bulletin. The death toll from COVID-19 in Brazil has crossed 40,000 after 1,239 people died in the past 24 hours. In the US, 910 people have died overnight, with the toll nearing 114,000. Meanwhile, Mexico's death toll has risen by 587 to nearly 16,000. Worldwide, the death count has crossed 421,000, while infections are over 7.5 million. Further details in this report.
Countries are forced to choose between human and economic damage of COVID-19 as fears of a second coronavirus outbreak hit global shares. The UN says the economic fallout from the pandemic can plunge to an extra 395 million people into extreme poverty. While Latin America continues to be the virus epicenter, its worst hit country, Brazil, has reopened shopping malls in all major cities. The island nation of Cuba is looking forward to reopening its borders, but the government announced it will do so in phases.
During the first phase, we will not only restart tourism from the first phase. From the first day we say, it starts from this day. Tourism will open up, but what will open? How will it start? During that first phase, only the internal market will open. In other words, the national tourism, those who live in Cuba.
China has reported 7 new coronavirus cases, including the first instance of a local transmission in Beijing in weeks. Authorities said the other 6 cases were all brought into the country by Chinese citizens arriving from abroad. Meanwhile, South Korea has announced to extend its prevention and sanitation guidelines until daily new infections drop to single digits.
The government has decided to extend the current prevention and sanitation guidelines in the capital area while putting extra quarantine efforts after discussing with local governments in Seoul area.
Over in Australia, the federal government has stepped up pressure on state leaders to reopen internal borders to revive the country's economy. In Indonesia, hundreds of children have died from COVID-19, giving the country one of the world's highest rates of child deaths from the virus.
Pakistan has reported a record 107 deaths from COVID-19 and over 6,000 infections in the last 24 hours. The health ministry says the country's death toll has risen to 2,463 with over 124,000 cases. The ministry said over 40,000 patients of coronavirus have recovered so far. The province of Punjab leads in the number of cases with over 47,000 cases so far. The southern province of Sindh has nearly 47,000 cases. Yesterday, Prime Minister Imran Khan warned of strict action against the business community for not following the COVID-19 SOPs. In another news, Pakistan Foreign Office spokesperson Aisha Farooqi says religious space for minorities in India is shrinking day by day. Commenting on the denial of visas to a US panel on religious freedom, Farooqi said it has become clear to the international community that India is headed towards being a Hindu state. Farooqi said India has unleashed its discriminatory policies on people through acts like the CAA and NRC. She added that the recent report of the US Commission on International Religious Freedom had described India as a country of particular concern. In its annual report, the watchdog said India should be placed on the US government's list of the worst religious freedom violators in the world. Earlier, India's Foreign Minister Subramaniam Jaishankar said such foreign agencies have no standing to assess the constitutional rights of citizens. The Taliban say they have killed 9 Afghan soldiers in a roadside bomb blast in the eastern Paktika province. In a tweet, spokesperson Zabiullah Mujahid said the attack was carried out on a military reinforcement convoy. Mujahid said 8 others were wounded, while 7 armored personnel carrier vehicles were destroyed in the attack. Several incidents have been reported in Paktika as a brief truce between the Taliban and Afghan government holds loosely after Eid ul-Fitr. Kabul has not commented on the group's claim yet. The US has hailed the release of prisoners by the Afghan administration and the Taliban. In a tweet, Washington's Envoy Zalmay Khalilzad says the intra-Afghan negotiations must begin as soon as the prisoner swap completes. The envoy said getting to the intra-Afghan talks has been a key objective from the very beginning. Khalilzad appreciated the Taliban's willingness to participate in the dialogue within 1 week of the prisoners' release. He said all sides must work together to prevent spoilers from undermining the peace process. Kabul has released more than 3,000 Taliban prisoners, while President Ashraf Ghani says 2,000 more will be freed soon. On the other side, the Taliban have also released more than 500 Afghan inmates. Russia says keeping quiet about the Western coalition crimes in Iraq is impermissible and those responsible must be brought to justice. This comes after the UK said all inquiries and prosecution of British military personnel for crimes in Iraq will be wrapped up within weeks. In a news briefing, Russia's Foreign Minister Maria Zakharova said it is unclear why the investigation of specific incidents and facts was being terminated. She said it is important to prevent crimes from being brushed under the carpet. The Foreign Minister questioned the justice of the Western coalition. Zakharova said UK's stance is clear evidence that London is determined to conceal numerous instances of disgraceful conduct by British troops in Iraq. The US has promised to reduce its troops from Iraq over the coming months after talks with Baghdad. A joint statement of the strategic dialogue said Washington does not seek a permanent military presence in Iraq. It said the troops will be reduced over significant progress made in the fight against ISIS. While in return, Iraq promised to protect bases housing US troops under threat after a series of rocket attacks. Both countries also discussed Iraq's economic and energy crisis amid the COVID-19 pandemic. The two countries held their first strategic dialogue in more than a decade after the killing of Iranian Commander General Qasem Soleimani. Iraq's delegation was led by the Deputy Minister for Foreign Affairs Abdul Karim Hashim, while Under Secretary of State David Hale led the US team. The US says the withdrawal of its forces from Syria will be a political decision as terror threats from ISIS still exist. At a think tank event, US Central Command General Kenneth McKenzie said the stay in Syria is yet to be over. He said CENTCOM should be taken into account as part of the 2017 US National Defense Strategy. The US general said the strategy prioritizes great power competition over counterterrorism with China and Russia in the Middle East. McKenzie said he worries about China's role in the region as Beijing gets over 50% of its oil through the Strait of Hormuz. Syria has been mired in a vicious civil war since early 2011 when the Assad regime cracked down on pro-democracy protests. Now, the U.S. has increased funding for its missile defense systems in the National Defense Authorization Act for the fiscal year 2021. U.S. Senate's Armed Services Committee approved the additional funds in a 25-2 vote. The draft bill summary provides additional funding for the hypersonic and ballistic tracking space sensor weapons, among others. The bill authorizes $1.4 billion for the Pacific Deterrence Initiative to send China a strong signal and defend U.S. interests in the Indo-Pacific region. The legislation also mandates realigning and improving weapons capabilities in the region to blunt a possible offensive from Beijing. The law provides $9.1 billion to procure 95 Joint Strike Fighter aircraft, 14 more than the U.S. administration had actually requested. The International Criminal Court has criticized the U.S. sanctions as an unacceptable attempt to interfere with the rule of law. In a statement, the ICC said Washington's economic and travel restrictions against the court's employees amount to threats and coercion. The Hague-based tribunal said it will stand by its investigators and staff in the face of a series of unprecedented attacks on the court. Meanwhile, the European Union reassured the court of its steadfast support. The bloc's Foreign Affairs Minister Josep Borrell said Washington's measures against the legal body are a matter of serious concern.
For sure, this is a matter of serious concern, as you can understand, because we, as European Union, we are steadfast supporters of the International Criminal Court. I think that for sure I can reiterate our support to this institution.
Earlier, US President Donald Trump sanctioned investigators involved in an ICC inquiry into possible war crimes in Afghanistan. The Human Rights Watch condemned the move, calling it a blatant attempt at obstruction and contempt for the global rule of law. Now, moving on to North Korea, which has accused the US of making empty promises, calling Washington a long-term threat to Pyongyang. In a statement, North Korea's Foreign Minister Ri Sun-won said Pyongyang will develop more reliable military forces to counter Washington's threat. Ri said there was little reason to continue the personal relationship between North Korea's supreme leader Kim Jong-un and US President Donald Trump. He said the Trump administration was only focused on scoring political points by threatening Pyongyang with nuclear strikes and regime change. Meanwhile, a US State Department spokesperson said Washington is committed to reaching a balanced agreement with Pyongyang. The bilateral tensions have been intensifying since the failed Vietnam summit between Kim and Trump in February 2019. We're now taking a short break, but stay tuned for more news. Welcome back. UAE's envoy to US, Yusuf Al-Uthayba, says Israel cannot expect to normalize relations with the Arab world if it annexes land in the occupied West Bank. In an article in the Israeli newspaper, Al-Uthayba said the move will be an illegal takeover of the land Palestinians seek for a state. He said the annexation will upend all Israeli aspirations for improved security, economic and cultural ties with the Arab world and UAE. The envoy said the move will undermine the changing opinion of the people about Israel. Israel has no diplomatic relations with Gulf Arab countries, but common concerns over Iran's regional influence have led to a thaw in ties. The UN says cruise missiles used in Houthis' attacks on oil facilities and an international airport in Saudi Arabia last year were of Iranian origin. This comes as Washington pushes the UNSC to extend an arms embargo on Iran that is due to expire in October under the nuclear deal. In a report, Secretary General Antonio Guterres told the Security Council weapons that the US seized last year were also of Iranian origin. Guterres added the drones used in May and September attacks were also of Iranian origin. Iran's mission to the United Nations in New York did not immediately respond to a request for comment on the report. However, Council veto powers Russia and China have already signaled their opposition to the move. The 15-member council is due to discuss the report later this month. The UN has expressed horror at reports of at least 8 mass graves discovered in Libya's Tarhuna city. Last week, the country's internationally recognized government retook the area from Khalifa Haftar's led Eastern forces. In a tweet, the UN mission in Libya said the international law requires prompt, effective, and transparent investigations into all alleged cases of unlawful deaths. The mission said it welcomes the Justice Minister's decision to establish a committee to look into the matter. It said it will provide all the necessary support to the government to probe the mass graves. The Government of National Accord has claimed to find mass graves in areas controlled by Haftar's forces. It said the remains of those of imprisoned government soldiers as well as civilians. Anti-government protesters take to the streets in multiple Lebanese cities, setting up burning barricades and forcing road closures. A rapid fall in the currency and mounting economic hardship sparked the demonstrations. Roads were blocked in several areas, including a southern suburb of Beirut that is considered a Hezbollah stronghold. Protesters in Tripoli threw petrol bombs at a central bank building, prompting security forces to fire tear gas. The Lebanese pound slid to about 5,000 to the dollar and has lost 70% of its value since October. The devaluation has increased inflation and unemployment in the crisis-hit country. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson and the top EU officials will hold talks on June 15th to revive stalled negotiations on future ties. In a tweet, the EU spokesman said Council President Charles Michel and European Commission head Ursula von der Leyen agreed for the talks. Meanwhile, France has warned that it will be difficult for the EU and the UK to reach an agreement over a new trade relationship by year-end. French State Minister Amélie de Montchalin said the negotiations should be completed in 4 months, which seems difficult. Slovak police say they have killed a 22-year-old man who attacked staff and students with a knife at a school. The school's vice principal was killed while 4 others were wounded in the assault. Police said the wounded include 2 children and 2 adults in the attack at an elementary school in the town of Rutke. The attacker was then shot by police after fleeing the school. Police President Milan Lukansky said the attacker is believed to be a former student. Slovak elementary schools began reopening on June 1st under an easing of coronavirus lockdown measures. Pakistan says it remains committed to cooperating with all neighbors on controlling the locust threat. Foreign Office spokesperson Aisha Faruqi says Pakistan, India, Afghanistan and Iran have decided to revive communications at the level of Food and Agriculture Organization. Faruqi said all countries in South and West Asia have agreed to constitute a technical team to exchange information. She said Pakistan has been participating in these meetings on a weekly basis. The spokesperson said these exchanges are fruitful in sharing information in the bordering areas of Pakistan and India. Earlier, India's External Affairs Ministry said New Delhi has proposed to Pakistan to activate technical level meetings in the run-up to main meetings. It said the 2 states can undertake a joint locust control operation and facilitate the supply of pesticides. The EU Aviation Safety Agency has certified for flight the world's first fully electric aeroplane, the Pipistrel Velis Electro. In a statement, the aviation body said this will pave the way for environmentally sustainable and emission-free aviation. EASA Executive Director Patrick Kaya said this is the first electric aircraft but will not be the last. Velis Electro is a 2-seater aircraft intended primarily for pilot training. The certification process was completed in less than 3 years. Islamabad has approved the construction of Khyber Pass Economic Corridor between Pakistan and Afghanistan. The PESHAWAR-TORKHAM project is expected to be completed by 2024 with a building cost of 65 billion rupees. Federal Minister Nurul Haq Qadri said the 48-kilometer project will comprise 4-lane expressway and an industrial zone. He said the project will usher into an economic revolution in the area. The minister said the corridor will link Central Asia with South Asian region through Afghanistan and will be a guarantor of prosperity in the region. UK's economy has shrunk by 20.4% in April, the largest monthly contraction on record since 1997. The Office for National Statistics says historic fall due to COVID-19 lockdown affected virtually all areas of activity. The contraction is 3 times greater than the decline seen during 2008 financial crisis. The ONS said from February to April, economy declined by about 10.5%. compared with the previous 3-month period. ONS Deputy National Statistician Rob Ken-Smith said April's fall in GDP brought the size of the economy to what it was in 2002. The Bank of England and the country's budget office have warned Britain can be heading for its deepest recession in 3 centuries this year. The International Monetary Fund says governments around the world have spent $10 trillion to combat COVID-19 pandemic and its economic fallout. In a blog, Fund's Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva wrote further efforts are needed to contain the fallout. Georgieva said it is very likely IMF will further cut its April forecast for 3% contraction in global output. She said to promote a more inclusive recovery, further spending should focus on minimizing job losses and preventing a rise in inequality. Georgieva said COVID-19 crisis is inflicting the most pain on those who are already vulnerable, which can lead to a significant rise in income inequality. European stock markets are trading higher after rebounding from previous session's major sell-off. Investors are treading cautiously after US Federal Reserve presented a bleak picture of the economic outlook. The major rally was led by auto stocks, which jumped over 2% to lead gains. CAC 40 in Paris is trading about 1.5% higher. London's FTSE 100 and Frankfurt's DAX has gained about 1% each. In Asia, Seoul's Kospi led the losses to close over 2% lower, while Nikkei 225 lost 0.75%. Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index lost ground, while the Shanghai Composite closed flat. Meanwhile, international benchmark Brent crude oil price has lost over 0.5%, powering early losses. Now let's look at the weather from around the globe. This is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news.